So, hello all, and thank you for joining us for Fostering Strong Intermediary and Subsite Relationships. I'm Jessica Birch with the Corporation for National and Community Service in Washington, D.C., and I'll be your host for today's webinar. I'll also be facilitating the live Q&A at the end of the session. Also joining us are Rachel Raddick and Jenny Farrell from our partners at Education Northwest, who have helped to prepare today's webinar and will be managing the WebEx technology. You'll see them in the chat and Q&A to help address questions you may have during the session. So what are we going to be talking about today? What are our goals for this session? So what we hope that you get out of this webinar and what you'll be able to do is to understand key strategies for identifying and vetting subsites. Some of you may have been intermediaries for a while. Some of you may be just starting out. Some of you may be looking to expand. So we're going to talk about some key strategies for identifying and vetting subsites. Also, identifying tools to provide during subsite training that really define the roles and responsibilities. So for those of you who have a lot of subsites or even just one subsite, just want to give you some good strategies and tools to do that well. And also discussing the communication practices that create strong partnerships. We know that sometimes there's an intermediary, there's a state office, and the intermediary, then the subsite, then the Vista member, and it can kind of act like a game of telephone. And if we've all played telephone before, we know that sometimes what was first said is not what the last person hears. So developing some good communication practices is key to make sure everyone's on the same page. So we're going to talk about some of that. First, though, let's briefly just discuss about what an intermediary sponsor is responsible for. So intermediary sponsors have the primary responsibility for management of the project, which includes reporting requirements, managing Vista resources, and providing support necessary to achieve project goals. Intermediary sponsors inform subsite supervisors of their responsibilities to both the organization and to the Corporation for National and Community Service. Because the intermediary model is unique in that the responsible party, that intermediary person, is not always the person who is managing the day-to-day work of the Vista member at the site, it's important to ensure that a strong relationship between intermediaries and subsites is established. So let's start off really quickly. We want to have you take a quick poll here. As a subsite or intermediary supervisor, how would you rate your working relationship with your intermediary or subsite? So let us know. On the right-hand side, a poll should have opened. So maybe you have an excellent relationship. Maybe it's pretty good, fair, poor, or other. If you want to elaborate on what other is, you can definitely do so in the chat, but you definitely don't need to. So we're going to let the poll here for a little bit. We're going to leave it open. And as we just give you a few more minutes to do that, just want to know, just kind of want to get a pulse of where everyone is in this session. So the poll has about 10 more seconds left. So if you haven't done it, scramble over there and do it right now. And then we'll get those poll results and just kind of see where most of you would rate that relationship. All right, the poll has ended, and we are waiting for those results. Always as I wait for them, it's like, you know, waiting for paint to dry, so never as quickly as I want it, but we're going to get that data here really soon. So it looks like most of you said that the relationship is pretty good. So a lot of you, the vast majority said that you have a pretty good relationship, which is fantastic. Some people said excellent, which is fantastic as well. A few fair. There's some of you that just didn't answer, so whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know. But I'm happy to hear that the majority of you have a pretty good relationship. And whether or not you have a dynamite relationship with your intermediary or subsite, or if you have a relationship that could really use some TLC, we have resources and tips for you to improve that relationship. Throughout this webinar, you're going to hear from an intermediary project supervisor and one of their subsite supervisors about how they work together to manage the Vista project and the Vista members successfully. We've structured this session as a type of question and answer for our speakers, and we'll share some of the tips and resources that they have. So on that note, let me introduce our speakers here today. I'd like to welcome Rachel Henderson. Rachel is the Program Support Coordinator for Literacy KC. Rachel started her time with Literacy KC in 2015 as an AmeriCorps Vista member, and in 2016 joined as a full-time staff member. Her current duties include potential and current student affairs, as well as overseeing the AmeriCorps Vista program, where Literacy KC serves as an intermediary to place Vista members in nonprofits in the greater Kansas City area. Rachel has a passion for public service and the ability to make lasting impact in the community and on the clients that she serves. When she isn't working, you can find her cheering on the Kansas City Royals and Chiefs, spending time with family and friends, and involved in her local and state PTA, and like anybody, traveling coast to coast. And love to do that, Rachel, so we're very happy to have you here. And also with us is Mandy. We have Mandy Caruso Yaney. Mandy is the Director of Community Engagement for Nourish KC, which is formerly known as Episcopal Community Services. In addition to overseeing the volunteer program and outreach activities, Mandy is the subsite supervisor for anywhere between 2 to 3 Vista members, and herself is a proud AmeriCorps alum. Nourish KC has been a subsite under Literacy KC since the fall of 2016. So thank you both for joining us today. We're very excited to have your insights, what's worked for you, what have been challenges. So let's dive into that first question. So this question is first for you, Rachel. As an intermediary, how do you identify and bring great subsites on board? And how do you retain those sites once you have them?
Wonderful. Thanks, Jessica, for the introduction. So I would say for us, when identifying and bringing on great sites, I think there's 3 main points that we look at. So I think the first one is, who are we bringing on? So are we bringing on a like-minded org, for instance, an organization that we previously have a relationship with, or somehow supports the work that our project or our organization, Literacy KC, serves? Or is this a state office referral or someone that our org is not familiar with? So is this going to be starting a relationship from the start? Or is this just someone that was interested and sent maybe a concept paper to the state office? Both have their pros and cons, and I think the biggest thing for us is trying to figure out whether or not those pros and cons play into the choice we bring as we decide whether or not to bring them on. I think the second piece of it is being upfront with expectations of the overall project. So as we all know, Vista is very complicated. So if we address our sites in a manner where we're laying all of the expectations of what it is to train members, what their involvement in events will be, especially the reporting aspect, as well as the member support, I think if we lay those out up front, then we get better end results in the end. Thirdly, which I think is one of my aha, being a proud Vista alum and a part of the project that I currently manage, is does the organization have previous experience with AmeriCorps, or perhaps as one of the supervisors or someone who's going to have a direct relationship with the Vista member and alumni of Vista or any other program of AmeriCorps, as those individuals are really going to be able to hone in on that member support, which is so vital in a successful project. Other qualities that I may look at over the time of the application process is going to be their timeliness of the application process. So were they a site that gave me 1 day before the deadline to get their information in, or were they asking questions along the way? I think that speaks a lot about just individual sites' abilities to be able to manage a project, but also, are they going to be someone that gets a report to you at the last minute? So I think there's a lot of different stories to tell there, as well as just the overall, does the organization get it? Do they get the true mission and vision of AmeriCorps and what Vista is doing to bring individuals out of poverty? Once these orgs are a part of our project, we retain these sites by providing multiple avenues of training through individual one-on-one meetings, mandatory training, social gatherings for both members and supervisors, but most importantly, I think the biggest part is the communication. So speaking of bringing on sites, Mandy, how was your experience when we brought you on board? What was really helpful and what maybe was a challenge?
So I think our organizations actually knew each other. We had definitely known of each other before we came on as a subsite, but I wasn't directly involved right away. Our president and CEO was in a meeting, I think, with your executive director, and somehow they had a conversation, and then I had the application placed on my desk, and I got pulled into it. But I will say that my boss knew that I was an AmeriCorps alum. I'm very proud about it. I had it on my resume, and he also knew that I had previous experience as a subsite under Habitat for Humanity. So I had to report my numbers to Habitat International because they write one huge grant for all the Habitat affiliates. And so I think his knowledge of my experience in the organization and being a subsite supervisor in the past, it was a natural thing for him to say, yeah, we can do this. Mandy's done it before. I think what helped a whole lot is knowing that my boss knew what my experience was and that I was a huge proponent and had already had conversations with him about how AmeriCorps, any program of AmeriCorps really, would have helped us build some capacity in a very cost-efficient manner, because we all know that's important in the nonprofit world. But it also really helped that your application was so clear, and I loved the checklist at the beginning of the application that kind of went through step by step. These are the things that you're going to have to give us or talk about with your board or whatever, and it was just very easy to know what the process needed to look like. I am a very proactive communicator, so I know that you and I went to coffee and went to lunch and had a lot of conversations along the way, which was partly to help me answer my questions and know that I was on the right track with things, but it was really great for me to get a sense for you and how you were going to be to work with as an intermediary. I think the biggest challenges on our end are the same things that are always a challenge with any nonprofit doing anything. It's finding the time, and it's finding the space for your members to be, and finding the money to cost share your members and then to provide them with the things that they're going to need, whether that's making sure that you've got money built into your budget to reimburse them for mileage, for example, or making sure that you have office furniture and computers for them to use while they're there, and those kinds of things. I will say that even though those things are a challenge, and I think they're a challenge for any nonprofit at any level, it's also a great return on your investment. If you do come up with a way to get those computers, bringing in members, especially when you do a good job recruiting and training them, they up your capacity so much, it's absolutely worth the effort to get those things in place.
Thank you, Mandy and Rachel. So I'm happy that that relationship worked out with both of you, and I promise all the listeners on here, I did not, pay them to say, yes, it went really smooth and it was great and we love each other. No, I'm happy that this was a smooth process, and Mandy, you said that checklist that Rachel provided was great. So now that Rachel, you had Mandy and her site identified and your other sites, now it gets into training. So subsite training. So my question is back now to you, Rachel, is once you're getting someone trained, what is the strategy that you've used to train them effectively? Can you just share some specific resources if you have any, maybe webinars or online tools, but what has worked for you?
Yeah, so I think for us, one of the biggest thing is realizing who our audience is. So I think effectively training our subsite supervisors looks different for each one. So I think sometimes we have to hone in on those and figure out what will work for this individual subsite supervisor, but what will work for all of them overall. I think for all of them overall, we do have in our MOU and set out in our expectations when we bring sites on, is that we do have a mandatory annual training for all of our subsites. So that means each and every one of them comes together to not only hear what we have to say, but I think this is an opportunity for them to also hear about how each other are working differently at their different sites to push out this vision or goal of our project. So, of course, throughout that training, we have the review of basic procedures and protocol, but we also focus on new rollouts, such as the transition to PSO blend, or for some of our supervisors, some of them, when they get on e-grants, they just get it. And for some of our other supervisors, it's more of the technology, it's more of a technology not issue per se, but maybe they just don't grasp the concept as quickly. So then transitioning all of our subsite supervisors into the ability to select members in the e-grant system and not have to get an email from Rachel like, great, I'm glad you got this member. Can you answer these 5 questions? So I think strategizing their initial involvement through all of the systems, because figuring out, hey, how quickly can this person grasp e-grants, or how can they recruit members effectively, just trying to figure out how to keep them always learning something new or something different than they've been doing in the past as a way to help them grow. But then I think when we talk about managing members, I think we set the expectation that this is going to be more than the typical staff, so that when you're supervising this individual, it's more of a mentor-mentee relationship, and that these members are not working for a lot of money, and sometimes they won't always see their impact, so you're going to have to be their biggest support system. So really being effective in training our Vista subsites supervisors of how to, suggestions for member support, so little bitty notes or coffee talks or just chats that aren't so formal as your weekly meeting is going to be really important.
Thank you, Rachel. And one of the things that stuck out from what you just said was really, you said it in a different way, but it's almost on like you kind of do a needs assessment with your potential subsites. Like, listen, like this is what you need to know, and then you kind of determine, okay, so this site maybe the e-grant system or the technology just is going to take more time, and then from there, you know, strategizing as you said, their initial involvement. So like they're always learning, they're always in there from the beginning. I think that's really great because you're setting that expectation up ahead of time that this is all that needs to go on, and you're trying to get them to that place. I think that that's wonderful. So now I want to bring back in Mandy. Mandy, I have a little bit of a different question here for you. It's what training has been most helpful in developing your skills as a Vista supervisor? And if there's any recommendations that you have for intermediaries that really resonated with you and, you know, helped you be a better supervisor to your Vistas.
So I think I love the way Rachel tries to do that needs assessment and kind of tailor each subsite's needs. I know when we do the social gatherings that Literacy KC puts on for all of their cohort participants, the subsite supervisors, like we all kind of gather in our little group, and then all the members kind of gather and go hang out with them. And with talking to the other subsite supervisors, it's always really interesting just to have us in the same room and kind of talk about how we handle things like the similar situation, but we might all handle it really differently. So I think those social gatherings and those mandatory trainings are really great because we all are in the same room and can share from our experiences and our individual backgrounds. But I also know that like the first step that you kind of have to overcome with anybody doing this is just making sure that they really understand what AmeriCorps is and what Vista is. And because I was an alum, I kind of got to skip that whole piece. And I think that might be one of the harder pieces to get through for anybody that wants to talk about AmeriCorps service. Like we all have to have that elevator speech at the ready, because you could put the AmeriCorps Vista symbol on your business card, or you could be wearing a Vista shirt, and people are like, oh, what does that mean? And we all know because we're in the system, but you kind of have to do that with your board and all of your colleagues at a subsite to make sure they get it too. As far as like training that's been helpful as a Vista supervisor, I think it's your basic management skills that anybody needs anytime. Like some of us have been managers for a lot longer, and some of us have, you know, are fairly new to managing people when we get into this. And all of the things that you need to be a good manager in any realm are kind of the same across the board. It's communications training, it's conflict resolution, it's general coaching skills and how to have difficult conversations when somebody is struggling with things, so that you don't end up kind of making them feel worse about it, but that you end up kind of picking them up and building them up along the way, especially because so many Vista members are usually coming into this young in their nonprofit career. There's just a lot they don't know. I have members that have never been in an office setting and don't know how to set up voicemail, or don't know how to use the network copier, for example. And, you know, some of them are very proactive and ask questions, and some of them are very intimidated and are afraid to ask questions. So just being reminded of how to observe your members in a way where you can kind of assess what struggles they're having, and then how to have those conversations with them. And that's, like I said, any manager at any point in their career kind of needs to be reminded of those skills. I also think that I have to give a plug to Vista Campus here, because I am somebody who tends to be fairly proactive, and when I knew I was going to be a subsite supervisor, I went to Vista Campus and I downloaded the supervisor manual. And even though the manual is really for somebody who's running their own site and not necessarily specific to subsite supervisors, there's just a lot of good information in there, and the Vista Campus has a lot of great webinar recordings that I have gone and listened to when I, you know, forget how to do good conflict resolution or something, like when I just want a refresher and want to feel better about how to attack an issue that I'm having and come up with a good solution. Vista Campus is a really great resource. And no, I did not get paid to say that.
Mandy knew exactly what I was going to say. They're not going to believe me anymore if I keep saying it. But that's wonderful. And I think that that's really the key. You know, Rachel, you mentioned before, you mentioned that you try to let your subsites know that, like, this is going to be more work than maybe supervising a regular full-time employee of the organization, that this is going to be different. And Mandy, right, you know, you said that you know, that kind of the management skills, those kinds of things are universal. So I think paired with that, like the knowledge that, yes, you're going to need to spend more time with your Vista members, or they're going to need maybe a little bit more supervision, paired with the need to just have management training in general. I think really just coming in with both those expectations and that opportunity is going to set you up for success. So I'm happy that that happens at your organization. That's great. So let's talk about a few takeaways here. So we want to just reach out and give you some tips and tools that you can use. So just a few tips that we heard from Rachel and Mandy. The first is reach out to like-minded organizations to identify subsites. So if you're looking to identify new ones, or maybe you are interested in becoming an intermediary at some point, reach out to some that are like-minded, maybe some that have experience with AmeriCorps. You know, it could be people that you're already familiar with. Also, ensure that your application communicates subsite expectations. I'm sure we've all been there where we've like filled something out, or we've done something only to find out, oh, I'm not eligible, or oh, this is more than I thought, or oh, this isn't what I wanted. So having that expectation clear to, hey, if you're going to be a subsite here, if you want to apply to be a subsite, this is what's going to be required, I think really saves everyone a lot of time, and it really weeds out those that maybe this isn't for them, or they just don't have the capacity to take that on. And last but not least is providing opportunities for networking. So, you know, Mandy and Rachel talked about networking with other subsites, others in the area, to really have a chance to see what each of them are doing, how it's different, how you would approach things differently. We know that this can be a struggle if maybe you're an intermediary with subsites across the country. I know we have a lot of intermediaries that really do have to manage at a distance. But there are a lot of different ways to network. I mean, luckily, we are in 2018. There are Skype meetings. There's webinar type things where you can network. Definitely doesn't always replace the face-to-face, but it is a great way to do that. And just providing those opportunities for them to connect is great. So then some tools that we want to just highlight here for you. We do have some great tools on the Vista campus. The first is the Vista Sponsor and Subsite Supervisor Major Tasks at a Glance. You can customize this checklist to make sure that your subsites have the background needed to manage their Vistas. So definitely take a look at that. We also have the Supervisor Orientation Workbook. So if there's supervisors here on the phone who have gone to supervisor orientation, this workbook will look very familiar to you. Maybe you lost yours, so you can always look at the electronic version. And it's also something you can share with your subsite supervisors, because just because they didn't go to orientation does not mean that they can't find that useful. And then Also, there's subsite supervisor orientation. So we did a webinar. It's a webinar recording of just like a mini supervisor orientation, but really directed at subsites. So if you're an intermediary and you have subsites that just need to kind of get the basics, have them watch this. If you're a subsite and you want to do the same thing, go ahead and take a look. So now we want to hear back from you again. We're going to ask our first question to intermediary supervisors on the phone. So as an intermediary, do you feel clear about the expectations around the Vista project and reporting requirements? So another poll question here. Answer it, it's on the right-hand side, and this is for intermediary supervisors. So yes, I feel totally clear. You feel totally clear. Maybe some of you feel like clear in some areas, others are a little blurry. Some, I just really don't know what I don't know, or nope, I am totally unclear. Let us know. The poll is going on the right-hand side, so intermediary supervisors, let us know. And we'll ask the subsites a similar question here in just a little bit. But those intermediary supervisors, just let us know. And let's see, I'm just going to call on Rachel and Mandy while we wait this to go. I'm going to call Rachel first, and Mandy, I'll get you next. Rachel, when you first started out as an intermediary, what would have been your answer here?
So I would say B, clear in some areas and not others.
Okay.
I feel like, you know, the member support and the training, I got that because I got to go to supervisor training, and luckily there were a couple other intermediaries there while I was there. I think not others, because there's always something to grow from. Even today I was an intermediary project, and I feel like, hey, I'm working on a yes, I'm almost there, but I know there will always be something that I could probably do better.
That's great. And it sounds like you were falling in line with everyone else on this. It sounds like most people said B, clear in some areas, and not in others. A lot of you also said, yes, I'm totally clear, which is wonderful. That's fantastic. A few unsure or not clear, and then a couple of you didn't answer. We want to know what you're thinking. We want to be able to tailor this to you. So let us know in our poll.
Well, for subsites, we didn't answer. So.
Oh, that's very true. You know what? Look at you. Mandy, you know what I do without you on here? Well, you know what, Mandy?
I'm here to represent the subsites. I got you.
You asked for it. You asked for it. It's up here now. So now, for those subsite supervisors, same question. Do you feel clear about the expectations, the Vista project, around the Vista project and reporting requirements? So same question. We just opened a new poll, so all you subsites can go and answer that. Let us know, and I won't be freaked out if there's a bunch of you that did not answer this time. So let us know. Mandy, so when you first started as a subsite supervisor, so same kind of question for Rachel, when you first started, what would you have answered?
I think I would go with B, clear in some areas and not others. I think that, again, because I was an alum, I knew much more about what I was getting into, and because I had been a subsite supervisor under the Habitat for Humanity grant, I think that helped a whole lot. But one of the things we all know very well about Vista and CNCS is stuff is constantly evolving. So first you had to send all your members to PSO, and then they came out with PSO Blend, and now they're changing PSO Blend to virtual orientation or whatever they're calling it. Like, no matter how clear it is when you lay everything out, even if it's in this beautiful clear checklist, like nothing ever stays consistent from year to year, and definitely not from grant period to grant period. So I think it's great if you can be totally clear up front, but I think the reality is stuff is constantly evolving, and until you get into it and actually start doing it, you don't even know what you don't know.
True, which I feel like is the unsure, you know, like I think I'm good, but I don't know if I don't know it. So it sounds like the majority, I feel like there's a lot more intermediaries on here than subsites, but it looks like the majority of people answered the same as you would have, which is clear in some areas, not in others. Only a few unsure and not clear at all, and then a good amount for yes, totally clear, which is great to hear. So whereas we're talking about expectations, as we're talking about the Vista project, I want to ask Rachel here. Rachel, as an intermediary, how do you ensure adherence to the Vista reporting requirements? And what strategies do you try to instill to safeguard on that quality across multiple sites? Because you have to work with a lot of different people. So how do you do that with different partners and policies and procedures? How do you make that work?
Yeah, so I think each of our sites are established in both the beginning stages and again in the MOU about that annual training that I previously talked about. But, I apologize. Give me 1 second. So, adherence to the structure. So project director to supervisors, I would say, as Mandy even mentioned earlier, was making sure that I have those as needed emails of like, hey, you didn't get this in, or this isn't complete, or how can I help you, what's going on. I think that's a great way for me as a project supervisor to communicate with the supervisors. I think informal lunches, as Mandy also stated, I like to have those conversations that are kind of off the record. So it's not like, oh, hey, this is our structured subsite visit, or this is our structured, like, oh, it's time for me to check in with you. But just having those open conversations to get to know what's going on within their organizations. And then we also utilize something called a Vista Friday update. So this is our opportunity to let supervisors know what we've heard directly from the corporation, or we've heard directly from our from our state office. The other suggestions would be supervisors to members. So, of course, we make sure our supervisors are having their weekly meetings with their members. But even above those weekly meetings, I think taking it up a notch to suggesting weekly logs. So this is a format where they put in their time that they work, but also what did you work on? So this is your way of making sure you're holding your members accountable. We want to know the good, but we also want to know the bad as well. So I think we do a really good job, me and my team of meaning Vista leader and program coordinator, of just making sure that our Vista members and our leaders and our supervisors feel comfortable being able to tell us all of that good stuff that looks good reporting to the state, but also kind of just over-communicating issues that may be arising but maybe haven't reached that drama stage yet. I think giving our sites multiple ways to communicate is always a positive spin, as well as our Vista leader that we have, is their way of communicating with our members by having those quarterly events in both social and professional, allow our Vista leader to kind of make sure that our project site supervisors are making sure that they're adhering to, hey, are they having their weekly meetings? Are they making sure they're communicating? Are they making sure those things are taking place so that the Vista member feels well supported? So kind of that project structure is how we ensure that our site supervisors are adhering to our program. I also am a really big fan of, in my state's office program coordinator, the state office team, whatever you may have you, I love to over-communicate to them the same way that I ask my subsites to over-communicate to me, so then nothing catches us off guard. It's more of like to be expected. Or if it goes a different direction, then we're like, hey, it's averted or it's not an issue. But I think a really big part of that is we have a who do I talk to form. So both for the supervisor and for the member, there are like, hey, if I have questions about my MOU, I talk to Rachel. If I have questions about member events, I talk to the Vista leader. If I have questions about in training, who do I talk to? The program coordinator. So identifying both for supervisors who the correct individual to talk to, but also for the members, like, do I talk to the Vista leader? Do I need to talk to my site supervisor? And that kind of goes in a bigger circle of our conflict management plan, which is we don't want to be that third party that's coming in to your site, and we're not there on a day-to-day basis. I only know what you tell me, and I only know what you have expressed to me. So having a conflict management plan that is like, hey, we're going to have a conversation with both the supervisor and the member to separate those out and make sure both parties get their voices heard, and then we bring them together to make sure that we're not that third party that's coming in, because that's what makes it weird about this intermediary status. Like, yes, we're all working as one project for a bigger goal, but we're not at those sites. So I think having that who to talk to forum, as well as having a straightforward conflict management plan, has really made it easy for us to be able to have to safeguard and protect our policies.
Thank you. And you really talked about the great communication pieces. I think that's great. So you have like that communication kind of like chart, or I think you had a different word for it, but I'm calling it a chart, about like who to contact when. I think that's really helpful, especially with Vista members coming on board. They hear from a lot of people. I know they hear from me because I help, you know, get them ready for training, and then they're probably hearing from you. And if there's a site, like a intermediary that likes to be involved, you'll hear from them, and the state office maybe, and maybe the Vista member support unit. So it's a lot of people to hear from. So it's good to know that you kind of have this, okay, here's the protocol, and here's who you go through, because it can be really overwhelming. I did just want to ask one thing, because you did talk a little bit about the MOU. And so when you set that up with your sites, you said, I think you mentioned that you do a required training in the MOU. How has that worked out? I mean, I guess you probably talk about that from the beginning. So when someone is interested in becoming a subsite for your project, I'm sure that's in the expectations that you detailed ahead of time. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct. Yes, that's something that we have in our application as like part of that checklist of like, yes, I can attend a training, yes, I can provide the Vista with a phone and a desk and all of those different things, yes.
That makes sense. And I think you also did mention just kind of how the Vista leaders are involved, and just kind of what management of that is and how that's handled, which I think is really important, because you know, how do you ensure that people adhere to all these things? You really need buy-in from each and every person, because you're going to be the one to answer to it. So making sure that the Vista members know what to talk about and who to talk to it about, the subsites, and all of those sorts of things. So I think setting up those expectations from the start is great. So now I want to talk to Mandy. And so Mandy, my question for you is, this is around the VAD. So everyone, the VAD is the Vista assignment description. We liked our acronym, so I wanted to say that out loud. What recommendations do you have for intermediaries to ensure their subsite supervisors understand the Vista project and the VAD? I know this is a little bit different than reporting, but how would you recommend intermediaries do this?
So I think when I myself was doing direct service, and then when I was a subsite and subsite supervisor, and I kind of had a choice between whether I wanted direct service members or Vistas or a combination of both. And I don't know if everybody else feels this way, but I almost felt like there was this air of mystery around the Vista program because of two things. And it was the fact that they were in direct service and really focused on capacity building, and the VAD. Like with a direct service position, you didn't have to write a VAD. And there was this kind of fear and trepidation around that acronym. So when I came on, I didn't need to have a whole lot of help understanding the Vista project as a whole. Like I understood the concept of Vista, but the VAD kind of scared me because it had kind of been like told to me that I should be scared of it. And one of the things that I loved about the way Rachel kind of walked me through the process is just helping me understand that a VAD is really just a position description, and that it doesn't have to be set in stone. That it's okay if you have to go in and update your VAD in the middle of the term when you realize like what skills the Vista member really brings, or what they're not going to have time to get to because you were way overzealous in thinking about what they were going to be able to accomplish in a year. So one of the things I loved about working with you, Rachel, is that you, number one, were always patient with me and took time to answer all of my questions. But I wrote a rough draft of the VAD and I sent it to Rachel, and I was like, how is this? And she looked over it and like sat down with me on the over the phone and said, okay, so like here's some language that's probably not going to be kosher with the CNCS or the state office, and here's how I might rephrase that. And I mean, she just went through it and edited it with me, and then I could do a rewrite and send it again, and when she felt like it had a good chance of being approved, she'd send it on to the state office. And there was just a lot of communication along the whole process. And again, like reminding me that it's okay if it's not perfect and we need to go back and rework it halfway through the term. Like that's actually been, like, I put it on my calendar that when my members are here for 6 months, like we go and look at the VAD and see if things need to be reworked. And I use that, I mean, that VAD is a tool not just for the state office to know what I'm doing with members, but for Rachel to know what I'm doing with members, and then for my members to understand what's being asked of them when they're here. Like the VAD kind of becomes the tool that keeps everybody on the same page about what that member is and is not allowed to do. And I guess when I'm speaking about that, I also need to speak about like this view that VISTA members have limitations on what they're allowed to do because they are strictly indirect service and capacity building focused. And since I was a direct service person when I was a member, like direct service is great, and yes, like in some ways they get to do the stuff that is really visible and easy to show in pictures and easy to talk about and easy to feel good about. But I actually really love the VISTA program, and I'm kind of wish I had gone back and done a VISTA term. I had considered it and I didn't. But I think from an organization standpoint, the reason VISTA positions are so great is that capacity building is something that all nonprofits need help with, and that indirect service, the helping to actually design a program, the help to build up those resources so that the organization can grow and like do better programs is really a great opportunity. And again, while direct service looks and feels good and is really easy to talk about and show in pictures, it's the indirect service that probably has the bigger return on investment, because it's not just adding somebody to do more of what's already being done, but to help you develop in really creative ways and think out of the box to expand you in places you never thought you might go.
Thank you, Mandy. Yeah, the VAD, it sounds like that, I love that your relationship with Rachel, that you were just like be on the phone with one another and talking about, hey, this wording isn't maybe the best, let's change it to this way. I think that that's a really key piece. Rachel, it sounds like you wanted to give Mandy the, I don't want to say authority or the autonomy, but the ability to, draft the VAD and then let me look at it and let's work together. I think that's really key because, there are some times where maybe the intermediary just drafts the full VAD and then it's given to the subsite and maybe they're not fully aware of what's going on, and then that's hard to communicate with the VISTA member. So I think that that relationship that you both have sounds great and able to communicate with each other. And there's that open relationship with that, and able to discussing the VAD, making notes, and updating it to be the best that it can be, so that Mandy, you can actually, check in with the VISTA about it. You all are on the same page with it. I think that's really key in ensuring not only that the VAD gets completed or that the goals are met, but also that the VISTA member, feels like they know what they're doing because you can explain it to them and you've had this conversation with Rachel. I think that's wonderful. So a few takeaways from this around project expectations. We would like you to, consider quarterly reporting to monitor progress and provide support. So, intermediaries, you have specific reporting requirements, and so then from there, you need to get information from your subsites. A helpful strategy is just to consider quarterly reporting, asking your subsite supervisors to give me the progress, to do that kind of stuff on a quarterly basis so that it's already kind of set up from the beginning that, hey, they need to report on these things, they need to be tracking these things, so that when those reports come semi-annually or annually, you kind of already have that data or someone's already expecting to have to report on that. So that's a great tip. Also, conducting annual site visits. If you're able to go and visit your sites, checking in on that, just meeting with the VISTAs is a great way to just touch base with each of your subsites. And as Mandy mentioned, working in cooperation to develop that VAD. So working together to make sure the goals are met, that everyone knows what's going to happen with that, and then being able to communicate that to the VISTA member. A few tools that we would like to give you all. There is a new site orientation agenda sample. We're going to post that link in the chat. Use the sample agenda to orient new subsite supervisors and other staff to AmeriCorps Vista and the unique aspects of your Vista project. We also have a Memorandum of Understanding, an MOU sample. So if you've never done an MOU, you can take a look at this sample, just something to draft up and tweak as necessary. And then we also have a resource around creating effective VADs. So sharpening your ability to create and refine a Vista assignment description. You can kind of complete this course, and it really covers the elements of what makes it a good VAD. So we've posted those links in the chat. Thank you, Jenny. So now, Rachel, you talked a lot about communication before. So you talked about the project director to supervisors, and then supervisors to members, and then the Vista leader to members. So you really talked about that level of communication. So now I want to take it to Mandy and ask, as a subsite supervisor, so Rachel just kind of outlined this great, I don't want to say hierarchy of communication, but kind of the drill down of how it goes. As a subsite supervisor, what communication challenges arise most often? And what specific strategies have you used to overcome any communication barriers? Anything that you can share with us?
Yeah, so I think this is one of the reasons why Rachel and I have worked together so well. There really haven't been very many issues, and because Rachel and I do make a point of meeting for coffee or lunch on a regular basis, and I mean, we're in the same city, so that makes it easy. Our offices are seriously like a half-mile apart. So that does make it very easy, and I know not everybody has that that ease of regular meetings, especially in person. But just to kind of reiterate the things that Rachel's done really well, we have those in-person meetings, and we usually follow up with them via email to just confirm in writing some basic points of the conversation, which means when we forget what we talked about, we can both go back to that email and be like, oh yeah, that's what we laid out. So it's really nice to have stuff in writing just to reinforce what you discuss in person. I would say it's really hard to over-communicate anything. So if in doubt, go ahead and send that email or make that phone call or go over those things again, because it's always better to over-communicate than under-communicate. And if you're, really getting annoying with it, hopefully people will let you know, but I have never experienced that level of over-communication. I think the biggest challenge that I have had as a subsite is when there's staff transitions. So Rachel is like the head of the program for Literacy KC, but she's got I guess she was the program coordinator with a Vista leader under her, and now she's actually going to have two folks under her. There's another person who's going to be the program coordinator and a new Vista leader. And so when there are those staff transitions, while she has that plan and she shares it with all of us about who to go to with what question, when that Vista leader is winding down her term and transitioning to another program and the new Vista leader isn't there yet, things got kind of fuzzy. I had questions and I wasn't sure if it should go to Rachel or if it should go to the Vista leader or if I should wait until the new Vista leader comes in. And that's just a logistical thing that's going to happen. That's the way life works. But as much as you can clarify dates when things are going to happen. Again, I really love the events where we pull people together so that there's in-person conversation. I think those are really helpful, and that great, very clear understanding of who to talk to for which issue. I know I've seen a couple of questions come up in the Q&A, and people are curious about how to handle communications with people that aren't in the same city. And I know that Rachel and I keep talking about how much we communicate with each other, but let me just say that we do get together for coffee and lunch because we like coffee and lunch, but we also have a lot of phone calls and do a lot of emails, and there are a lot of great technology options, whether that's a Google Hangout or a Facebook group or some of these kinds of things. Like, even if everybody can't be online at the same time, you could post a question in a Facebook group or a Google group and let people answer with their own expertise or their own perspectives in their own time so that everybody can go in and see those answers and have conversation that way. I mean, there are advantages to being in person, but there's also advantages to being spread out, and that everybody's going to have such a different perspective, and that might broaden everybody's experience by sharing from that.
Thank you, Mandy, and thank you so much for touching on just kind of, for those that can't get together for coffee, or, you know, maybe they don't like lunch and coffee as much as you and Rachel to get together, but it is a struggle because I do, as I mentioned before, I know there are a lot of sites at a distance. So yeah, I mean, definitely check out different types of communication methods, and look at the positives of that as well. Like, yeah, you can't all get into a conference room together, but the opportunities to provide different perspectives, and when you can meet, like on Skype or whatever you can meet on, Google Hang or whatnot, then it's an opportunity to kind of pick each other's brains coming from different areas. So thank you for that, Mandy. So we just want to give you a few takeaways around communication because we know it's important. It's some of what Rachel had mentioned before and also what Mandy has discussed now. So provide multiple communication opportunities. So it's helpful if you're available in more than just one type of form of communication. Also, that there's different people assigned to different kinds of communication. If you have that ability, making sure that, I can always expect stuff about reporting to come from X, or I can always expect something around member management to come from this. That's really helpful. Also, as Rachel mentioned earlier, create a conflict management plan. No one wants to have to think about conflict, but you're going to want to plan and never have to use it, then not have a plan and find yourself in need of one. So definitely create a conflict management plan. And encourage weekly meetings with members. We stress a lot during pre-service orientation and during our webinars with Vista members to meet with their supervisors because we know how important it is. So we encourage you to try to schedule meetings with your Vista members. If the intermediary can be involved, great, but definitely at least with the site supervisor, their direct supervisor, it's going to be extremely helpful. A few tools that we want to discuss with you. Is a few things that have come up here is successful member coaching and supervision for subsites. So you can adapt and use this PowerPoint presentation to train your subsite supervisors and other staff who work with Vistas around member supervision and coaching responsibilities. This is extremely helpful too if you have sites who maybe you're brand new to the AmeriCorps program. Vista is a unique kind of position. And there are restrictions and limitations and different opportunities that Vistas can be involved in. So definitely this is great for subsites and for other staff who may not know what Vista is to really give them an idea of what to expect of the Vista member at the site. We also have tips for running an effective meeting, so help your subsites manage their meeting time to be productive and focused. So this is a great tool. And then we also have a sample supervisor and member meeting agenda. So we said how important it is. If you kind of have no idea where to start, you can look at the sample meeting agenda to plan and facilitate regular one-on-one meetings with your Vista member. And we'll go ahead and put those in the chat so that you have links to those. We will be providing like a one-page resource or a resource after the session that you can download with all of these links as well, so you don't have to try to scramble to copy all of it. So you've heard a lot from us, which thank you, Mandy and Rachel, for all of that great information. Before we step away from communication, we want to now hear from you. What communication structures and practices do you find most helpful to ensure a successful Vista project? So the chat question, we want you to enter your ideas in the chat box and make sure that you send your message to all participants. So what kind of communication structures and practices have you found most helpful? Is there something that maybe definitely want to echo that Mandy and Rachel have talked about, maybe something completely different that's really worked well for you? Let us know in the chat and we'll start to read some of those out. All right, looks like it's just coming in here. Let's take a look. So Joshua, I'm so sorry, says always have open communication. So open communication is great. I'm assuming you mean that with not only subsites, but with Vista members, hopefully with the state offices as well. Hopefully your state offices are very open on that communication. Weekly meetings, you said weekly meetings are helpful. It's great. Definitely touching base is a great way to make sure everyone's on the same page with everything. We also have Donna says conference calling for the Vista group and supervisors together. Then they hear from one another as well. That's great, like one big old family of a meeting, which is fantastic. Z also said sometimes an off-site lunch meeting. Sometimes it's nice just to get out of the office. I think they have like these whole things about like sad desk lunches, which I totally have all the time, but sometimes it's nice to get out, have meetings that way, just kind of a different change in the scenery. Let's take a look here. Other communication structures, clear deadlines for activities and reports, so making sure that's clear. And I'm going to take it one step further, Jose, and I'm just going to say make sure that's, you know, identified up front, like getting people know that this is how it's going to be from the start is really helpful. Let's take a look here. We have a lot of conference calls or Skype visits, a lot of these different things. So keep those coming in. Keep those coming in because we want to hear from you. We want you to share with one another around what you find to be successful. Let's see, I'll take one last one here from Ashley. She said, our Vistas and interns do a weekly process group with our on-site counselor, and Vistas meet with me for coffee once a month. That's great. That's a fun, nice thing. It's probably something that they look forward to, too, every month. I would look forward to having a coffee thing with my boss every month, so that's great. So keep those coming in, and we're going to move to our next section here, which is around member recruitment. And this is for Rachel. So I know intermediaries, a lot of people have different strategies around member recruitment. So my first question for you is, do your subsite supervisors help with member recruitment, or do you work alone in recruitment? And what are the pros and cons of that recruitment process?
Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, I went to that supervisor training, and those couple of intermediaries that I had met, each of them did it a little bit different, but I think what has worked best for our project, because as I mentioned even earlier as well, that I'm not involved at those organizations every day. I don't know what an ideal candidate looks like for each of those sites, so I kind of have taken that into our member recruitment aspect. So our sites are 100% responsible for recruitment. Our Vista leaders get the VADs and the opportunity listings up on eGrants, and then as the applications come in, our sites are responsible for interviewing and selecting a candidate. We do help with the recruitment process as far as like selecting the member in eGrants for some of our supervisors who are not knee-deep in the eGrants system, but I think the biggest thing is we make them responsible for their choice, so it's not us putting someone who may not be the right fit within their organization, and that's only what works best for us. I know other sites that do it differently, and it works best for them. I will say that we do provide assistance completely all the way through. Our Vista leader is also always out recruiting, so they do fairs, they send direct emails to departments of universities, so the language arts, if we're looking for someone that's more of a writer. Utilizing those Vista leaders in the recruitment process has been successful, but even the way we do it has its pros and its cons. So for us, one of the pros is that the responsibility is on the site and not so much on myself, and so that frees up some of my time. But one of the cons that we have also realized is that sometimes throughout that interview process, our supervisors don't have although we've had this mandatory training, we told them to get on Vista campus, they don't have all of the information they need to be able to answer their Vistas or their candidates' questions. So then they either find themselves emailing us or trying to figure out, oh, I don't know what to tell you. And sometimes that can be uncomfortable for a candidate when you're like, oh, be an AmeriCorps Vista member, and this is all the reasons why, but then those questions they have sometimes our supervisors are unable to answer. So I think, as I mentioned before, it has its pros and its cons.
Thank you. it sounds like, you know, with member recruitment, it's not a one-person kind of a job here, and we know that your job as an intermediary supervisor and a subsite supervisor is probably just a piece of your overall responsibilities at your organization. And recruitment can be a full-time job. So it sounds like, you know, getting, you know, everyone kind of involved, making sure everyone, you know, as you said, you don't know day to day what's going on there, what the needs of the organization are. So really tapping into the resources you have on those sites to really help with recruitment is key. So it sounds like you're sharing the wealth there with that responsibility. And, you know, obviously having to mitigate some of the risks of maybe making sure everyone's telling the same, the correct information, but it sounds like you have a good process there. So now I want to take it over to Mandy. So Mandy, because you work with Rachel and you kind of know the process that she goes with and what's the process of recruitment there, we're wondering, have you experienced any challenge with recruiting quality members? And I'm touching on the term ghosting because that was a theme on the Vista campus around Vista members, or Vista candidates, I should say, or applicants who are so interested, you interview them, they're great, and then they just drop off the map. Like, you just don't ever hear from them again. I know ghosting is typically like in dating, but there's been references to ghosting here with applicants. Have you experienced that or any other kind of challenges like that, and how has your intermediary helped you overcome those challenges? And Mandy, if you are on mute, we cannot hear you. All right, I'm not sure if we lost Mandy. Her phone may have cut out. I do see some people here in the chat that says they have experienced that they've experienced ghosting before. I'm going to go ahead and just try to see if Mandy is here again. I just want to make sure if she got cut off.
I swear I'm here.
Mandy, you're there. Fantastic. So let us know, what challenges have you had regarding recruiting quality members?
I have no idea what happened there. I'm so sorry. So I think we've all experienced like that. You have that great interview and then something happens. There's lots of great recruitment resources. There's entire webinars on Vista Campus, and I don't want to reiterate too many things there, but I think the way that Literacy KC puts it on the subsites is exactly right, because we're the ones that are going to be daily managing them, and we know what kind of people it's going to take to do the jobs that we're looking for. And it even varies from year to year in the same position. My VAD for a volunteer coordinator last year was looking at somebody who could help us find a technical solution to up our capacity. We want a good data collection. We wanted a place that people could do waivers of liability electronically, so we didn't have all this paper and data entry to do. And that was going to require somebody with more research and technical skills. But for next year, I want that same position to focus on recruitment, which means I need somebody who's more extroverted and a people person and a salesman. So that's going to be a very different kind of candidate. And Rachel wouldn't know that. She would just know I had a volunteer coordinator, VAD again, and wouldn't necessarily think about that aspect of it. The biggest thing that I think has been really helpful in my recruiting is I ask every single applicant that I get the same list of questions. And it's basically laying out the basics of the position. I share the VAD, and then I ask them why they're interested in this particular position, why they are interested in being a Vista member, and what they are hoping to get out of their year of service. I want to make sure that these people understand that, you know, Vista is not a paying gig. It's really a volunteer gig with a living stipend. I want to make sure that they're not going to ditch me at the end because they're going to go through the whole thing, and then when they see that it's, you know, $940 a month take-home pay, oh, that's ridiculous, nobody can live on that. I mean, I'm very upfront about that from the beginning. And then keep in mind that no matter how clear you are and no matter how good your recruitment process is, life happens and a lot of it's out of your control. So as much as you can have a backup plan so that if somebody does fall off the face of the earth, or it's too long until their PSO comes up and they get offered a full-time job. I mean, that's happened to me multiple times. I mean, have somebody else in mind so that if they back out, hopefully you have a good backup person that might not be as good, but might be really great in their own way.
That's great. I feel like a lot of things could just be, like the tagline could be like life happens, like the best laid plans. No, that's great. And I mean, I think it's really, Rachel mentioned making sure those expectations for subsites when recruiting for subsites, those expectations are not up front, because you don't want someone getting into something only to like waste time and then not able to, oh, this isn't for me, or no, this isn't what I wanted, and then then it's kind of wasted everybody's time, then they're not really interested in it. It's kind of the same thing with Vistas. So I'm going to let you know all of what's going on with Vista. Like, this is how much you're going to make, these are your benefits, this is what this is going to entail, and you know this up front. So then hopefully mitigating those people who make it past that are more serious, which I think is a great way to discuss that, and kind of make sure that you have people who really are not feeling that they don't know fully what they're getting themselves into. So let's move to our next question here before we get to the Q&A with our wonderful attendees here. This is around member management. So Rachel, as an intermediary, how can you best support subsites, or as an intermediary, how can you best support subsite supervisors and their members without seeming like you're interfering, especially at a distance? I know that can be a difficult thing. So what are your recommendations about that?
Yeah, so I think kind of like the focus of today, or a lot of the thoughts that have come from fostering great relationships, is that communication. Making sure that communication up front, so making sure both your members and your supervisors are all in the know. I know for our cohort of members, we have a leader manual, but we also have like a member manual, kind of just overview of how our project works. So I think communicating up front is so important. We have talked a lot about communication. I think that's the best way to keep this short and sweet, but the importance of this is going to be the key to alleviate and to be ahead of any questions or problems that arise in the future for the project.
Thank you, Rachel. So Mandy, what recommendations do you have for intermediaries in providing support in member management from a subsite kind of perspective?
Yeah, so I'm going to echo Rachel. Can you tell we're a team? The communication piece is really important. Rachel is my backup. We're on the same team. It's not like I pass the buck to her. We work together. So I've been very fortunate in that I haven't had a lot of member issues. I think good recruitment will help alleviate a lot of member issues. But whenever I felt like there was even the hint of an issue developing, I made sure that I let Rachel know what was going on. And, it might not have been anything. I might have had a member who called in sick for several days in a row, and I was like, hey, I don't know what's going on, but my member's calling in sick a lot. I just want you to be aware. And she was like, okay, just let me know if this turns into a problem. And the member would come back, and I'd make sure that they were okay when we had our weekly check-in meeting, and nothing evolved from that. But if anything did evolve from that, Rachel would have already had the heads up, and I think that's helpful.
That's great, and especially around communication, because I know Rachel mentioned this earlier, around communication of good things and bad things. So, Rachel's your backup. You've not had a lot of issues, which is great. But keeping everyone in the know when there are issues is very important. Like, obviously no one wants to hear bad news, but I'd rather hear bad news quicker than like find out that it was going on for weeks. So having that good communication there, especially around member management, is really key. So let's quickly talk about some of the takeaways from this. First, allow your sites an opportunity to assist in the recruitment process. I think this is really key. I know different projects have different responsibilities and different approaches. From what Rachel and Mandy have experienced, I think it's a great model to allow the site supervisor, the one who's actually going to be managing the Vista day-to-day, to have some kind of a role in that, because it really allows them to feel invested, I should say, in that Vista member, in that project, and kind of the outcomes. Also, create a communication structure that keeps both members and supervisors in the know. So make sure that everyone kind of knows what their responsibilities are. Everyone knows what who to talk to about what, and what to expect from each person. As I said before, Vista members hear from a lot of different people, so streamlining that communication or ensuring that it's as clear as can be is going to be really key to their success. A few tools that we want to discuss are, we have recruiting resources. The Vista member recruitment site wheel has 5 stages with planning, marketing, screening, interviewing, and selecting. You can access this on the Vista campus, and there are resources and job aids on the page to support your recruitment tasks. We also have a recruitment team training and process enhancement. So you can train your recruitment team, that's including subsite supervisors, and enhance your recruitment processes. And then we also have resources on selecting Vista members to ensure that you get the best qualified Vistas and make sure that they kind of complete everything they need to officially come on board. I do also want to say around member recruitment, we will be doing a webinar next month around member recruitment, so we'll talk more about that then. One last question that I have for both intermediaries and supervisors, and then we will get to Q&A. Intermediaries, let us know, what is one thing about your role that you would like subsites to know? So is there something about, the things that you have to do, like, man, I really wish my subsites knew this, or it's good for subsites to be aware of X? Let us know, put that in the chat, and I'm going to ask Jenny and Rachel Raddick, who are with our partners at Education Northwest, to let us know what's coming in through the chat.
Thanks, Jessica. Okay, I will let you know what's coming in here. So we have we are still waiting for some chats to roll on in. Looking for one thing about your role. So we have some, I don't know that there's a problem unless they tell me about it. So being open to really communicate with your supervisor. Vista members all talk to each other across the project. So being really careful about when and if you make any exceptions. Any more chats out there? Subsites, what is one thing about your role that you'd like intermediaries to know? So Marissa says, I have a hard time getting end-of-the-year feedback from supervisors to input into future plans, and she emphasizes that it's super brief, but does have a bit of trouble. Mandy or Rachel, do you have any suggestions for Marissa?
Yeah, if I can, I just saw that response, and so something that I totally forgot to mention was that all of our sites complete quarterly reports, which look very similar to the reports that come from the corporation that we complete in e-grants. And so for our sites, when I don't get responses on those FPS, there is a question that's similar to, like, what has the member excelled at? So if you have more frequent reporting avenues, so because our sites report every 3 months as well as turn in their timesheets every 3 months, then you have some things or some good moments to take to put in that future plans form. So kind of asking that question to your supervisors as an answer to one of your reporting questions for them. So in the reports you ask from your supervisor, have a question that's framed around those SPS questions, and does this individual take initiative? Are they reliable? Do they come to work on time? So then you can kind of have a really good idea. I don't think the FPS has to be exact for that specific moment, but I think if you have some past data that you can kind of give an idea, I think that would be helpful.
See, that's really helpful for me, Rachel, seeing as how I just had to do my quarterly reports last week. And I just typed into the chat box as well that as a subsite, I don't know what your reports look like, so I know what I get on that quarterly report form. And just for everyone else on the call, Rachel and Literacy KC do it through Google Docs, so it's one link that they just share and everybody just goes and types in it. I think it might be a Google form. But I don't always know, like, what the questions that you ask me, I don't know how they're going to be lumped all together in your report. I don't know where to be like super detailed and give you specific numbers, or where I just need to be brief and just give you like the basic information so you can move on to the next thing. So I think it might be helpful to share what your report looks like, maybe, so that I kind of know when I'm giving you answers, like how you're going to lump my stuff in with other people's and how it's going to become a report for your whole program.
So I'm going to add that is wonderful. My apologies. I'm going to add that is wonderful feedback on my side, but I think something that we have left out for Mandy is that your report looks just like our report does, so I'm not having to guess information.
Gotcha.
However, some of the number aspects have missed, so you don't know this yet, but you will soon see a new reporting document that only gets better. So I think that, you know, having these conversations about feedback and whatnot are definitely important with subsites.
Thank you both. So I think that's the perfect moment to like move on to question and answer. Before we move to that, as I keep saying this the whole time, we're going to start Q&A, but first you're going to see on the right-hand side an evaluation pop up. Please take a few moments to share your feedback through the quick poll on the right side. This really lets us know what you liked about the webinar, what topics you want to see included in future webinars, what went well, what you want more of. We really do take these to heart. We look at these every time they come in, and we make them for you. We do these webinars, we do these sessions for you. So please let us know what you want so that we can give it to you. We're going to now move to the Q&A. I do want to bring on our operator very quickly to let us know how you can ask a question over the phone. Operator, are you there?
I am, thank you. If you would like to ask a question, please press *1 and you will be prompted to record your first and your last name. Please unmute your phone when recording your name, and to withdraw your question, press *2. One moment, please.
Thank you. So let's go ahead and get some questions that came in through the Q&A while we wait for chat questions via phone to come in. So this question is for Rachel. Rachel, the question came in about what do typical site visits look like? What do they look like? So when you do them as an intermediary, what do they kind of look like? What do yours entail?
So our site visits entail an office tour, and because we have only been an intermediary for 3 years, this is now our second year of initiating site visits. So that tour may not be needed for sites that are not so new in the future, but it starts with the tour, and then both myself and the Vista leader accompany me on the site visits. We break out into those separate meetings where we have a list of questions for how do you think things are going, what could be improved, where do you think you struggle as a site supervisor, what support can I provide to you. So really making sure, going back to that major task at a glance for both the sponsor and the supervisor, does the supervisor and does the site feel like we are meeting our end of the bargain, and are they meeting theirs, or are there opportunities for training, or is there anything else that we can provide to make this a great experience? I will say in our site visits, that's really the opportunity that we want our sites to be open, completely open if they haven't been open about anything, but also that face-to-face kind of puts the pressure on to be like, yes, just tell me because I'm here now. So.
And I will say from a subsite perspective, I like the site visits. I like a chance to kind of show off what my organization is doing. And Rachel can tell you, like, I have a notebook where I do one-on-ones with all of my Vista members at least every other week. It's every week when they first start, and then I kind of back off to every other week if they're not somebody that I am directly working with. So we have 3 members, and 2 of them are, like, directly mine, and 1 of them actually works for another one of our directors. I check in with her every other week. I check in with the 2 that I supervise directly every week, but I have a binder, and I hole punch their one-on-one weekly, like, I have a sheet that I use that I got off of Vista campus. It's just a template they gave for one-on-one meetings where I give time for the Vista member to give me their update, I do my update, and then we set out next steps before our next meeting. And I use that every week, and I hole punch it, and I put it in the binder, and it's divided by which member it is. And I couldn't wait to show it to Rachel. I have no idea if she appreciated it near as much as I wanted her to, but think of this as a way for you to kind of get a chance to talk about what you do and what your members bring to your program, and let your intermediary know that, like, how much you appreciate the program.
Thank you, Mandy, and thank you, Rachel. So the next question that comes in is around, let's pull this up here, is around communication, types of communication that should be used. So the question is around, are there any forms to assist subsite supervisors in the area of types of communication that should be used and how often? I think the question, and if you're the person who asked this question, please, if I say this wrong, let me know. How do you know what's best? How do you make that determination of, like, when is this considered an email? Is there any kind of rule of, not a rule of thumb, but is there any kind of rules that you have for doing that, for knowing what should be an email, what should be a phone call, any kind of strategy you use? Mandy, I'm going to send this to you because they said it around subsite supervisors. Is there anything that you use?
I don't have anything in writing, but this is actually a really great question because I had this conversation with one of my members who's just, I mean, she's a recent college graduate, and she's trying to figure out how to fit in the professional workplace, and we have been talking a lot. I asked her after she'd been here a few months, I'm like, so just checking in, you know, how do you feel like things are going this far? And she looks at me and she goes, I just had no idea how much adulting revolved around email, which I thought was hilarious. But I mean, she's right. Like, she spends a lot of time sending emails out to our partners and then waiting for them to respond. And so one of the things that I've been talking through with her is kind of understanding this, I'm going to call it a communications hierarchy. So if you're communicating with a whole lot of people and it's just general information that's kind of, you know, an FYI or a, hey, just want to give you a heads up kind of thing, I think email is fine for that. Email is great for communicating with a lot of people, something fairly simple all at once. If it's something that's going to be a little bit more involved and it's just going to take forever to write it out, or if it's something that's super time sensitive, that's when I would go to a phone call or an in-person meeting. And for those of you that have the option to do in-person meetings, like I would do in-person meetings, number one, just to like touch base. Like Rachel and I probably have coffee or lunch, I don't know, every quarter-ish. And there's not always an agenda. I mean, sometimes it's just, hey, how are you doing? I haven't seen you in a while, and what's new in your world, and how are the kids? I mean, we're friends in addition to being colleagues in this work. But if something is, again, something super time sensitive, or if you're worried about confidentiality, I wouldn't necessarily put stuff that needs to be confidential in an email unless you're needing like written record of something that happened to go back and have the paper trail, because email is our paper trail anymore. But those in-person meetings can be really good for confidential stuff. And also, like, keep in mind when you're doing this communication stuff, if you're doing a phone call and your office maybe has multiple people and the phone call isn't necessarily private, like try to find another room where you can have that phone call without other people potentially listening in or walking in. I'm saying that as I'm sitting here in a room with 3 other people as I've been on this webinar the whole time. I did not go to a private place, but you know, those are all the kinds of things that I would consider, and I kind of see it as a hierarchy with how important something is and how many people you're trying to communicate it to and how complicated is it. Sometimes it's just not worth 45 minutes to type out an email when you can pick up the phone and have the conversation in 10 minutes.
Thank you, and it's definitely something that they don't tell you, that adulting includes so much email. Definitely not. Loved that observation. Let's take a look here. Another question that has come in. Request has been made, and Rachel, I think this may question to go to you, but Mandy, please feel free to answer it as well. Person had a question about, I think, creating an advisory board. What are some like brief like tips or things that you would want to talk to you about, you know, setting that up or getting that, you know, implemented when you're applying?
Yeah, so I think for us, we are still in our like pilot stage of an advisory council for our project, but I think the gist of it is we all have who we are trying to serve through the work that we're doing, both in the nonprofit world, but also with our Vista project. So getting at least half of the members on this advisory council are members that we are clients or individuals that we serve. But I also think getting a variety of clients, so I'm not going to reach out to all clients that Literacy KC, our organization, serves. We want to try and chime into those clients that Nourish KC serves, or that Connecting for Good, or some of our other subsites serve, so that we can get an overall, because we all, yes, we all are in the Kansas City metro, but we all touch a different type of demographic. So I think there is some good information about starting an advisory council in the Vista campus, and I wish that was something that I was able to give more information, but that goes to that question earlier when we talked about, as an intermediary, how do you feel? So there are some things that I'm really clear on, but for me, the advisory council is something that I'm not as clear on, and so I think utilizing other intermediaries that we either know or through the Vista campus, creating those relationships. I'm such a relationship person, so I didn't come up with the application myself. I was able to utilize another partner, so I think we all don't want to recreate the wheel, so if we utilize the great folks that we have on this webinar, as well as the processes through the Vista campus that the corporation and our friends at Education Northwest have created, we can definitely find some great answers for that.
Thank you, Rachel. So I do want to be cognizant of time. We do have a few more questions that we are going to answer. I do just want to wrap up really quickly and just discuss our next session, and then we'll get back to Q&A. So I just want to say thank you all for being here. Thank you, Rachel and Mandy, for your great work and for all the information that you've given us. Before we get back to Q&A, I do just want to talk about our upcoming webinar. Our next webinar is actually tomorrow. It is around virtual member orientation. It's a new way of preparing Vista members for service. It is tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, so join us. The link to register is on the Vista campus, so we really do hope that you can join us. So thank you so much for being here. And if you can stay, wonderful. We'd love it so that we can continue to answer your questions. So let's go back. Jenny, can we go back to this question slide? I don't know if people really need that question slide, but I like it. So we can put it back right over there and answer some of the more of the questions that have come up. Another question that came up here was, and this question I'm pretty sure is for you, Rachel, is how do you develop consequences for sites who submit late reports or out of compliance? Have you had experience with that happening, and how have you handled it?
Ooh, that is a tough question. So no one likes to be that person, unfortunately. So as our project, we renew annually, and I know a couple are on like a 3-year type deal. But for us, after we complete those site visits, we send out, very similar to what the corporation does for us when they come and do their site visit, except they don't do theirs every year. We send out a site visit report, and it's like an official document of like, these are what we found, these are our recommendations, and this is like the action that we would like for you to take, if any. So unfortunately, we have had to let a site go in the past, and I think it is not just those regulations that were like, but it's the reporting. Are you attending the training? So I think just like any other business runs their business, if you're not being beneficial or you're not adhering to the guidelines, then there's consequences. I think those consequences first start out as like a blatant conversation between both of us as from an intermediary supervisor to the subsite, but then I think after that we take it to the next level. I fortunately have my ED who attends those meetings or is brought in to know like, hey, this is what's going on with this site, and then we have that second meeting, and then after nothing has changed, we kind of give the at the close of this service year. So it is, no one likes to do that, but I think just making sure, maybe that's even what the advisory council oversees is, hey, these sites aren't, you know, abiding by the guidelines, what is our procedure in place? But I will say, because we are still so new, we haven't had a lot of that, and I am very big on relationship building and making sure, you know, just like members, recruiting is key when it even comes to sites. So I think part of that all plays a piece in it. So.
Thank you. And another I'm happy that you haven't run into this very much, which is wonderful, and I wish all of you intermediaries and subsites never have to run into that. I do want to also recommend talking to your state office. Like, if you're just unfamiliar, if you're an intermediary and this is the first time this has happened, really talk to your state office. You know, they've had projects for years, for decades, and I'm sure it's happened. So they'll have some experience in managing that if you have any questions. So thank you for that, Rachel. I want to go and ask our operator if there are any questions over the phone. Operator, do we have any over the phone?
I am showing no questions.
Wonderful. All right, so it looks like we may have one other question here. And it looks like the question is, I think we may have already answered it, but I do just want to reiterate it because I think it is a big question is, Rachel, do you have sites that are at a distance? And if you do, how do you stay connected? I think you said most of yours you could easily all meet together, but if you can't, you know, I'm sure you can't meet every day, so how do you still stay in touch when you can't all get together? Are there ways that you've done that?
So I think for us, our furthest site is probably 45 minutes away from town. The rest of them are very similar to Mandy, as she mentioned, within like a 1 to 2 mile radius of our office. But for that site that is 45 minutes away, it just takes some constant, like, hey, let's hop on a call for a few moments, or let's chat over coffee. Luckily, this site has a place where we can go and we can kind of work off-site, so we can spend half of a day at that site. So not too much of an inconvenience, but I also think someone mentioned earlier the power of Skype and GoToMeeting and Google Hangouts. When I served as an AmeriCorps Vista member, I served for one of my terms at a national project, and so we were all placed all across the country, and we took advantage of Google Hangouts as well as other similar things to GoToMeeting and Skype. So I think utilizing the 21st century technology is going to be really important in engaging different sites to be able to still be able to have what Mandy talked about, that communication and that networking amongst each other, and putting faces with names is really cool. So.
Thank you, Rachel. I can't believe we don't have like holograms yet. Like, I feel like that's a thing. Like, I'd be able to hologram myself into some meeting, but
that may
you know,
be a thing in the future.
Exactly. Back to the Future made a lot of promises that did not pan out. I think all of the questions, we've gotten through all your questions. Once again, thank you all for being here. Rachel, Mandy, thank you all for your insight. Thank you for being wonderful supervisors. And everyone else who's on this phone call, thank you for being Vista supervisors. The work that you do is really invaluable, and you can really make or break a Vista member service. So I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy days to join us. And we hope to see you tomorrow on our webinar that talks about the virtual member orientation. So with that, I'm going to let you get on to your very busy days, but we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you so much.